Okay, go ahead.
Yes. So my life story is a very typical non-linear story. I was born in Korea in Seoul, and my entire family immigrated to Argentina. We ended up in Buenos Aires, which is in many ways culturally and geographically the opposite of what you would find in Korea. I grew up there since 6 years old, so culturally, I consider myself Latin American, even though I grew up in a family that had very strong Asian values. And you can imagine me in high school, in elementary school, as a typical sort of nerd. I was always about valedictorian, very studious, really wanting to dream about contributing to science in a way that would create some discovery, some new knowledge that could change the world. And so at that time, some of my life heroes were people like Madame Curie, who gave her life for science, and I found that to be a really meaningful way of spending your life. When I was about 15 years old, I started to look around, and since I wanted to be a scientist, I went to all of the local universities and checked out the laboratories and the equipment and the infrastructure. And it was really disheartening to see how poor the infrastructure was. Many labs didn't have windows, let alone the latest equipment. So I decided I had to find a way to go and find a university where I could do science and cutting edge science, where technology and
Okay.
resources would be different from what I could find in Argentina. So, this is pre-internet. I'm that old. I started to go to the libraries of English institutes, so places that where you would learn English language institutes, and they had libraries with booklets from different universities, and there was the Princeton ranking, and I started to look at names that I had never heard before, and that's where I discovered that I could apply to schools in the U.S. And I did that by handwriting letters and requesting brochures. And I was 15, so in the course of 2 years or so, I started to get all of these application forms and
This is
brochures.
my startup investing instructor. She's so bad.
I thought that was a question. No. So that's how my journey started. And I will tell you one story in that process. I knew nothing of how to apply to schools effectively. I was the first generation in my family going to college. And so my family, the only person that they could look up to who knew anything about colleges was the ambassador from Korea in Buenos Aires. And so somehow they scored a meeting with him, and we went to see him. And I presented my case. I showed my grades. I, showed all my ambition and grit. And he said, I don't want to, burst your bubble, but there's no way you can get into any of the schools. I mean, these schools have applications from all over the world. The rate of entrance and admission is just so low, like you can't do it. And I think that was really the nail that, the last nail that sealed the coffin for me in my determination to go and to try it out to prove this person wrong. And so that was all the motivation I needed. And I applied to a bunch of schools. I got into MIT, and I did my undergraduate there. I started my career as a technologist, filing patents when I was an undergraduate and getting really involved with the social entrepreneurship movement at MIT, where I got really involved with the world of water, and how do we solve the problem that 2 billion people in the world have of not accessing safe water in the world. So I worked on that. I learned a lot. I failed a lot. And that prompted me to come to Stanford, to California, to pursue my doctoral program, where I did 4.5 years. I had everything, all the requirements for the thesis. And then I got very excited to embark on my life as an entrepreneur as soon as possible, because that's what happens in Silicon Valley. Everybody's starting companies. You go to a coffee shop, everybody's a founder. You go into an Uber pool, and they're talking about their companies, or they're pitching to investors on the phone. And so you could really breathe the entrepreneurial spirit in the ecosystem. And I was studying social network theory and engineering as my PhD, but I was also organizing competitions like the Thunderbird organization, T-Bird. There was an equivalent group run by students called Basis, and I was one of the student leaders there. So I was really in the middle of all of the activity, the deal flow that was happening at Stanford. And finally, I jumped ship. I first had to deal with my mom, who was a Korean immigrant mom, and some of you may have heard about the importance that Korean moms place on education. So I had this desire, this urge to go out and start a company. I wanted to talk to my mom about, I'm going to drop out of Stanford of a PhD program when I have maybe 9 months left of work. Um, and she was so disheartened by this. She was very disappointed. She thought I had gone crazy. And so first she said, there's like over my dead body, this is not happening. You're graduating from Stanford. Entrepreneurship can wait. It's that's a hobby. It's not a real job. And so I ended up thinking about how to convince her, and I thought of showing her this piece of data that basically compiled the average income of PhD students who graduated from Stanford versus PhD students who dropped out from Stanford to start something else, right? And of course, at that time, it was one of the success cases coming out of Stanford was Google, where two grad students at Stanford dropped out to create and found Google, which already was a huge success. And so if you average their income with all of the dropouts from Stanford, it turns out your situation looks a lot better when you drop out than when you stay and finish. And so at that point, my mom suddenly had a change of mind. She supported my following my dreams, and that took me to creating my first company. The first company was actually a tech startup. It was a platform, a social network similar to LinkedIn meets Facebook, where we were helping entrepreneurs from all over the world reach meritocracy. So if you weren't in Silicon Valley, normally you didn't have access to a lot of funding because everywhere else, venture capital and angel investors were really hard to come by. But being from Asia and Latin America, I knew there's a lot of really good deal flow and talent everywhere. So I wanted to create a way for those people to be able to access the type of venture capital investments that we have in the US. So Unoodle was created with funding from Peter Thiel, and who's the first investor in Facebook, and Max Levchin, who's the co-founder of PayPal. And with a team of 5, we launched this company. I did that for a number of years, for about 2007 to 2014, so 7 years. I was the CEO of the company. And in 2014, I decided that, one of the gaps that I saw in the market was that a lot of investors didn't really understand all markets. There was no inclusion and representation in the VC community because 96% of all investors at that time were male and mostly white. So there was no ethnic and or gender diversity in tech. And so we created a fund called River Ventures, which is a VC fund, where we were focusing on a customer base that was primarily female, to be able to address the 80% of consumption that is decided by women, and the $2 to $3 trillion that are represented by consumption decisions that are made by women every year. Excuse me. Which is make women as a consumer base larger than India or China's markets. And so that VC fund is still running, but we deployed most of the funding. And then in 2017, I created another fund called Calais Ventures, which is focusing on early stage deals in Latin America. For a number of reasons, Latin America is exploding in terms of entrepreneurial activity. In the last few years, the number of unicorns, companies that are worth more than $1 billion, has doubled. And so a really exciting talent, better valuations, more reasonable and more accessible, but also a lot of need, a lot of pain points that don't have solutions today. And together with this, I've been doing a lot of work with nonprofits and ecosystem development with Global Entrepreneurship Week and Gen, which is the organization that brings together 10 million entrepreneurs every November with the celebration of entrepreneurship in 170 countries. So I serve in the global board. I serve in the board of Imagine H2O, which is a competition for water companies, and it's global. I have been very involved with the creation of Cleantech Open, which is an accelerator that has helped 1,000 companies raise $1 billion in funding. So a lot of work in contributing to the creation of clusters and ecosystems that help entrepreneurs in international clusters. And then finally, before joining Thunderbird, I have been teaching at Stanford for almost a decade, technology entrepreneurship. So I've been very passionate to share what I know with people who are younger than me and who are starting their careers. And part of the focus that I have had in this process is in helping students think about your life stories and how to apply entrepreneurial tools to planning your careers, to thinking about the value proposition that you as individuals have to offer the world. So I'll stop there and see if that prompts some questions or comments.
Great, thank you so much. So I put in the chat that if anyone has questions, they're more than welcome to type them in the chat, or you can raise your hand. Does anybody have any questions right now? Anybody have any questions? I guess my question, I'll start, Professor Hwang, is for anybody, entrepreneurship is definitely a hard thing, right? It's one thing, you have to basically live off of ramen for quite some time. You have to be able to find venture capitalists, you have to be able to find angel investors, you have to raise money, you have to do all these things. So what's your biggest advice to somebody who is afraid to go into entrepreneurship because they're afraid to fail?
Good question. Entrepreneurship is not for the faint-hearted. I'm not going to paint a rosy picture of going into the creation of startups because the odds are against you. You will most likely fail more than once in starting these ventures. You are by definition tackling really hard problems to solve. That's why there are no solutions, right? That's why the solutions are insufficient or not good enough, because those are really our problems to crack. And so you have to have a certain element of obsession and wanting to solve the problem because it touches you personally, or because it touches a community that you understand and empathize with very much. And also, I see that entrepreneurs do have this very sometimes innate, sometimes acquired desire to create value. And there's something addictive about this. Imagine having an idea in the shower one day, being able to put that together into a physical and/or a software product, and then seeing people use that product and like it and comment on it, and seeing that solves a very tangible problem for them. I have worked with people. For example, my co-founder at Rebeca Ventures is one of the founding team members of YouTube, and she created a product that eventually has been used by billions of people. I mean, that's something that makes you feel godlike in some ways, right? There's something that you create and it becomes alive and it becomes scalable, and people are benefiting from that. And that is super addictive, because there's nothing more instantaneously pleasing than putting out there some product, a solution, and then seeing people use it and love it. That's one of the problems I had with my thesis, that I would write 400 pages of a thesis for a year in a basement at Stanford, and 20 people were going to read it, right? And that is not as satisfactory in terms of your motivation than that this capacity to create and generate change of behavior. It's like tremendous power and influence you can have. The other part of entrepreneurship that is, I think, very important and attractive to many people is the fact that you create your own employability. When I graduated from MIT in 2002, and that was the middle of the crisis. If you remember, the year before me, it was still a lot of companies in the internet boom were doing really well. Like my classmates were flown over to Silicon Valley in, first class flights and seats, and they were fed caviar, and it was just all luxury. And then my turn came to look for a job, and every interview was virtual, and we're lucky if we're served pizza in some of the events that they had at MIT. And so things change a lot, and sometimes there's abundance, and sometimes we're like in our times, there's a pandemic, there's a global crisis, there's an immigration crisis, and you feel very much vulnerable to these macro events that change your ability to find the job of your dreams. But when you're an entrepreneur, you can gain control on that. You can say, well, I don't depend on this company or this person at this organization to think and agree that I have something to add or to offer as value. I can create that job for myself. And once you do that successfully, let's say in one cycle, you create a company, you're able to operate it, and you create profits, even if it's in small scale. Wow, that's empowering, because now you will never starve. If you are able to find a problem, find a solution, and make profit off it, from now on, you will never be vulnerable, because you will be able to create your own employability. And that's something that's also very addictive. You are in control, and that's really nice about entrepreneurship. In the middle of all that, of course, there are many days when every day you have cycles. Like you wake up like you're going to conquer the world, and you go to bed thinking I'm the biggest failure on this earth. And that variability of emotional roller coasters, if you don't have the resilience and a thick skin, that can be crushing.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I know it's definitely something that a lot of people come to Thunderbird for, and I know that it's something that a lot of people are nervous about, but I think it's great professors like you who have experience that can help us through that. I know we have a question in the chat, but I did want to get to Nodia because I know she had her question up first, or her hand up first. So go ahead. You're still on mute. Okay, while we're waiting, why don't we go to Anna Paula?
Hello. Thank you so much, Professor Hwang, for this presentation. My question was, what do you think are the biggest barriers for women entrepreneurs, especially in the US?
Yeah, that's a great question. We do have still a lot of work to do in terms of women in tech in general and women as founders. In Silicon Valley, for example, it's been shown with a number of studies that when you are in university, when you're studying, there is almost equal interest by women and men in starting companies. But as you climb up in the years of your program, it just starts getting more skewed. And eventually, when you're starting to raise funding, the numbers start looking really bleak for women. So depending on the stats, some stats show that it's, twice as hard, 8 times as hard. It depends on, how they're counting this, but it's been shown that it's harder for women with the same level of background, experience, and with a similar quality of an idea to raise money as compared to men. And this is due to biases that you have from the community of investors, who, as I said, are mostly skewed towards a fairly homogeneous composition, white males, and also, certain age group as well. So women in entrepreneurship tend to struggle with raising funding, have more challenges in having the right balance of leadership. As you probably heard a lot, CEOs have to be, salesy, ambitious, and they have to be able to have this confidence that, yes, I can create something that is going to kill Facebook, or I can create something that is going to make $1 billion. And that requires some leap of faith, right? I mean, you can never prove that you can do that with data. But it has been shown that, the standards and the expectations of how much traction and proof you have are different for different genders. And so there is a lot of I would say, additional challenges to being a woman in tech. And I'm not even, getting into the Me Too movement and harassment and, the culture of toxic sexual predators that some of these organizations have in technology. And so if you add all of that together, plus the fact that, in your most important years in your career, many women go also through parenthood and becoming mothers. This world, our society is not prepared to support women with that double objective. So a lot of women have to make a choice that is very hard, in either having a family or going into starting companies. So when they try to juggle both, there are other sacrifices that come about. And so it's very hard for women, but I think things are changing in a positive direction. A lot of work that has been done by activists, by the Me Too movement, by academics, and also practitioners, by entrepreneurs who are really trying to change the environment to be a lot more welcoming of women. But we have to do better. And this is a case pretty much everywhere in the world. There's no place where I would say we have gotten there.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. So it looks like we're having questions come into the chat. So first of all, Matthew Winstein asked, can you please talk more about the expertise that you view necessary to start a globally focused VC fund?
Yeah, so there are a few components that you need to start a VC fund. You need somebody in the team who is good at accessing pools of money. Unlike startups, when you raise money for a VC fund, you are asking people to give you money based on your reputation. You don't have a product. You don't have traction that you can show about how people are buying your product. You just have your resume, right? And your intelligence and your sales and persuasion skills, and the vision that you can communicate and articulate. So typically this means that, beyond having a good thesis, you do have to have access to money. Money for VCs comes from pension funds, from foundation endowments, for university endowments, and from family offices and private wealth. So if you're a first-time fund, you probably need to have some friends in the private wealth category, because normally institutions are not going to invest in first-time fund managers. And so, that's something that you have to be aware. You have to have somebody who's going to seed the fund with a first check, who has money or has access to money. The second trait or skill set you have to have in the VC fund is the ability to create deal sourcing. So either you come from networks like, the Thunderbirds or Stanfords or MITs of the world, where there is good deal flow of founders. If you talk in Latin America, we have accelerators and all the local universities that have been really good as sources for deal flow. And also, you have to have people who are really good at networking, because a lot of times this deal flow comes through non-traditional means. You could meet a deal flow at a wedding, at kite surfing events, at social events and parties, and that's actually very common in this business. And so, they say that's a problem with some of the well-fed cats in Silicon Valley who made a lot of money as VCs, and now they're in their 40s and 50s, and they don't want to bother to go to these dorm parties and hang out with people to be able to get access to deal flow. So they want to have people in the teams that have that ability to network with the source of the deals. And then the other part of a VC fund that's very important is how you accompany the portfolio company through the different stages of fundraising, and finally, when they're ready to exit, when they're ready to be bought by a larger company or to go through public offering, you have to have the skills to be able to make those connections. And so that involves both network as well as a fairly good understanding of how these companies can be positioned to be attractive acquisition targets. So sometimes those three skills could be in one person, but most likely you need a team to be able to do that. Now, if you talk about global VC, so you're not just in the US, but you have a number of countries that you're targeting, you absolutely need somebody who's an insider of the target market that you're trying to approach. It doesn't work well when you, for example, our Sequoia, which is a VC firm from Silicon Valley, one of the best, and decide to open up an office in Brazil by just sending someone to live there, right? It takes decades to be an insider in these networks. And so it's really important to be able to have members in the team who are not just connoisseurs of the market, but they have friends in different sectors, in the public sector, in more traditional businesses, with academics, so that you can really understand how to navigate the particular institutional context that you have in different countries.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So Les actually has a couple questions, but I'll start with his first question, which is, with all the challenges and the downsides of becoming an entrepreneur, what are the most rewarding parts to you about being an entrepreneur?
I covered a couple of them before, in terms of that empowerment and the addiction that could, the addictive feeling of creating something that people use. But at the end of the day, the best entrepreneurs are trying to solve a problem that they're facing. And those are really good entrepreneurs, because if you grew up, your entire life with people around you having cancer, this is really close to your heart, and you want to see a solution for this with your whole heart. And so when you're touched by a problem and you feel like there's something that's broken in society or in the market, when you can make a contribution to solving that problem, that gives meaning and purpose to your life. And other things that are really nice about entrepreneurship, and it could be very much fast-paced and intense, but you are surrounded by people who, if you build your team right, they're as passionate as you are in making positive change in the world and creating value. And so that's really enriching, when you have people around you who are not just thinking about, no, we can't do this because this rule or this code or this permit. No, you have people around you who are like all about, we'll make it happen. It sounds impossible, but we'll find a way. And that kind of sort of empowerment and positivity is also very addictive in some ways. It's really nice to be around people who are doers and makers and creators and builders. And I like that a lot. And there's a lot of control that you have in changing culture. If you join a company that already has a set of values, you could change things a little bit, right? But if you create things from scratch, you can set your rules. You can say, we all wear Hawaiian shirts every day, and if that makes you happy. And I think that's part of why, for example, we created Rivet Ventures with 4 female investors instead of trying to join an existing venture firm and making their, ratios of female versus male investors better, because it's that much harder. It's an uphill climb to go to an existing organization and change culture. But if you create your own, then you can have a almost utopian view of what should be the culture of an organization, and you can implement it. And that's the most power and influence you can have in your environment at work. And that's really nice about being an entrepreneur.
Great, thank you. Before we go on to Les's second question, I did just want to mention that Jonas asked a question, and he said, sometimes I feel like the market is getting saturated regardless of what the industry is. So any advice how you combat this mindset being an entrepreneur?
Absolutely. Markets get saturated all the time, and then we have new problems to solve all the time too. So, who knew that we will be thinking about virtual learning and virtual meetings and, the inability to travel and tracing contacts. Nobody even imagined in their wildest dreams that would be a problem that we needed to solve in 2020. And so, even though certain markets and sectors and verticals get saturated and you start having consolidation and some winners, the beauty of entrepreneurship is that there's never a shortage of problems. Some of the problems we wish we didn't have, like climate change, but the nature of the market is that we always have new puzzles to solve, and good entrepreneurs, talented entrepreneurs, really strive in times of crisis because of that, because crisis present a lot of problems, and problems become playgrounds for entrepreneurs and innovators to think about solutions. And in history, times of crisis have been always the most fertile grounds for the best, most valuable companies to be created. Just look at Amazon. When it started, it was right in the middle of the worst crisis in tech that we had in many years, and that's how it starts. So you know this phrase of never waste a crisis applies really well to entrepreneurs and investors in tech.
Awesome, thank you. So Les's second question, he talked a little bit about how he doesn't really have a lot of data, but he was wondering, is there a study or any data that shows the efficacy of women-led versus male-led startups? And what he was thinking in terms of that was that, to him, he thinks that more men are likely to start a business without a great plan, whereas he tends to see women as really having the plans put in place and all the pre-work done. So do you know if there's any data to support that?
There's a lot of data show the effect of having women in your executive team or in the founding team, and you won't be surprised to learn that the more diverse the team, the better it performs. Anecdotally, I can tell you some of the best companies I have in my portfolio are led by women, but we have to be careful of not generalizing too much or stereotyping too much about genders, because today we know that there's not two genders. And according, if you talk to a specialist, an academic who are researching gender and identity, they'll tell you there are more than 70 definitions of gender. And so it's not about women versus men. It's really about different types of traits and attributes that you show in your leadership skills and style. Some of the earlier research on this will point out to some gender differences, in terms of the type of leaders that you typically find in women managers and in male managers. But I like to think of this more in terms of just general diversity of perspectives. What you want to have in the team is as many different perspectives as possible, because that's 100% correlated to the level of creativity and resilience you have in the team. So we actually did a little, at Unoodle, one of our sort of inside small studies with our network. So this is not peer reviewed or anything, but even from the perspective of having perspectives that are different, not just gender or ethnicity or age, but we looked into, what is the effect, for example, of having a founding team that has all graduates from top 10 schools, right? Like Ivy League founders, for example, 2 founders from Harvard, 1 from Stanford, versus other types of compositions. And we found out that when you have all, let's say, HPS graduates, those companies tend to perform worse than having, for example, 2 founders from Ivy League schools and then 1 dropout, never went to school, or like did only 1 semester of school in a community college. And that composition tended to fare better. And the reason for that is, well, a couple of things there. One, the people who have a very different life experience bring perspectives that Silicon Valley Ivy League school graduates may not think about. They're building products for the masses, and their perspective is very privileged, and so that is sort of doomed to fail. And having perspectives that are very different and more representative helps. But also, specifically in the case of dropouts, we found that if you drop out of a program that would have given you a lot of stability, and let's say, because of the type of school and the type of jobs you could have access, but you still dropped out, that also is an indication of what was the opportunity that you saw on this particular startup to drop out of a program that could have given you a lot of stability. So in that person's calculation, probably the startup, offered a really huge potential as compared to finishing their career and getting a stable, well-paid job. So, this dynamic of dropping out was sort of a proxy of how interesting the opportunity of the startup was. And so, we saw that those companies did better. So I think, the message to take home is diversity, diversity, diversity.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I think all of us at Thunderbird totally agree with that 100% because we understand working on teams with each other and making friends with each other, that it's so important to have that in our groups. So before I continue with the chat, I'm going to go ahead and go to Andrew. I see you have your hand up. So Andrew, go ahead.
Hi, Professor Hwang, and thank you for doing this this meeting with us. So I was wanted to ask a question because I'm a little more risk adverse. And so like you said, there's a lot of stability coming out of this program, and I'm looking to possibly do consulting work as a possible future. I'm also passionate about eventually starting a venture, but I don't want to lose that stability. In terms of time management for working on projects while trying to maintain that stability, I know this might be more of a very mundane question, but just for time management, what would you suggest? And also, I was wondering what you thought about the reducing the element of risk in starting a new venture if from having coaches and other people who have applied different business models successfully to help you along the way. What would that help to be more risk averse and just about prioritization of time for that stability versus the new ventures?
Yes. Okay. So I don't think everybody's calling on this planet is to be an entrepreneur. We need consultants, and we need doctors, and we need lawyers, and we need academics, as well as entrepreneurs. And so I don't think necessarily that we should feel pressured to push ourselves outside of our comfort zone to start companies. However, even if you're a consultant or a public servant, you can apply entrepreneurial skills to any of these things. The tools that you learn in entrepreneurship can be applied in consulting and can be applied to coming up with a joke in stand-up comedy. And if you take some of my classes, we sometimes go through some examples of that, and guest speakers will share their life stories and how entrepreneurial tools are really everywhere. Now, if you are just curious about entrepreneurship and you want to start with some, a very solid frameworks that you can learn in consulting, a generally good ratio, and this is also applied by Google, for example, is to do 80% of your time on something that you're fairly sure that is going to be stable and is a project that's going to be successful from your understanding, and then allocate about 20% of your time in life to exploring new things, super crazy ideas, like it could be something that has no legs today, but you're just curious and you're dabbling into it to learn more about it and to get exposed to it. That's a good ratio. I think in general, it's a good idea to have a little bit of you and your mind share in something that's completely unrelated to your job, because going back to the saturation, the best and most original ideas typically come when you make these neural connections between something that you know really, really well and something that usually does not get linked to that field of study or to that vertical. And so when there are these unusual connections is when you do have the most creative ideas. They may not be good ideas, but they will be original and they will be creative. And most people have a hard time establishing those linkages between, very unusual friends in terms of the disciplines that don't get to mingle with each other that much. And so if you get good at connecting and recycling principles from one vertical to another, that is a really good asset and a good skill set to have. In your second question was about risk averse and how do you mitigate that risk. company founders and CEOs are not always these super risk-taking people. To be honest, many of them are introverted and like very risk averse. I had a co-founder once that was so risk averse in his personal life that he didn't want to change his lunch order ever. He ate the same thing every single day for 2 years I worked with him. And he was like, well, I mean, I know this works and this gives me exactly the amount of nutrition that I need for lunch. Like, I know that I don't feel sleepy after this. Like, I'm just gonna, go with what I know every single day. And he used to like take the same path to work, like not take a left turn when he was not supposed to, because he had measured the steps that got him to work from his house in the shortest amount of time, and like he never deviated from that. So like these personalities exist in startups, and many of the CEOs and leaders are like that. The difference is that they're extremely good data processing machines, and so they can think about all the scenarios. Like, if I do this, then A takes me to B, B takes me to Z, and then they map out all of the possible outcomes for every decision, and that's what keeps them up at night. But then by the time they're making a quote unquote risky decision, it's bounded because they have quantified in some model possible probabilities of different types of outcomes and paths. So in some ways, it looks risky from the outside because you don't know all of the analysis that went into it. But if you really look into it, there's a lot of scenario analysis and planning. And so, yes, there is still risk in being in a startup versus, for example, having a job in a tenured academic position from which you can't get fired. But you can do a lot to create risk levels that are really comfortable for you. And even within entrepreneurship, being a founder and creating your own company has more risk because more companies at that stage die. But a lot of companies are, sort of later stage and have a lot of funding, and they're about to go to public offering, for example. In those cases, the risk level is actually not as high. So you can get a taste of entrepreneurship by also managing the stage in which you get involved.
Wow, that's awesome. Thank you, Andrew, for that question. And man, I am a creature of habit, but I don't know if I could eat the same lunch for every single day. That would definitely be a struggle. So Nuria ended up getting her question into us. She said, how do you deal with competition? And what are the most important qualities you should develop in order to be successful in entrepreneurship as a whole?
So if you talk about the competition of your company versus others, I argue that the best attitude to have with competitors is to have this friendly approach to it. In Silicon Valley, we don't really think about one company for every life that you have or career. We think about, in my lifetime, in my career, I'm going to probably start 10 companies. And so this one that I'm working on right now, may be a competitor with John Smith next to me. But it's good to have a good relationship with John Smith because I may fail on this one, he may fail on that one, but tomorrow we may work together, or maybe we may join forces. And so it's a good thing to share enough so that the entire space can be lifted. When you, for example, see an Uber getting started, there's Uber, there's Lyft, there's at that point there's Sidecar. There are a number of companies that came up with the same idea and they're working in the same space. And at that point, it's more important to validate the entire space, like gig economy, than just being successful yourself. And so collaboration to some extent is actually really good for all of you. And, long term, you never know when you're going to be helping each other. So I think, instead of being very threatened by competitors, it's good to have a fairly friendly and amicable relationship with them. In some cases, there are, stories in Silicon Valley that are really fun about competition. I don't know if many of you know the story of PayPal, but PayPal was a competitor. So PayPal was led by Max Levchin and Peter Thiel, who met at an event at Stanford. PayPal, Max Levchin was the technical guy, Peter Thiel was a lawyer, and they got together and they had this idea of creating this company. So funnily enough, in the same building, there was Elon Musk's company that was doing exactly the same thing. So they are head-to-head competitors in the same building with two founders Peter Thiel and Elon Musk, who were obviously, some of the most talented entrepreneurs that Silicon Valley has produced over the years. And they were competing fiercely. In fact, there were jobs that interns had where their entire role was about going and looking at the daily trash coming out of the other company. There was an intern whose job was to be hiding in the bathroom stalls to overhear product roadmap, discussions that employees were having in the bathroom when they went there. And, stories, there was one time when a person who seemed to be homeless was, digging through their trash, and it turned out it was an employee from the other company. So like a lot of these crazy stories have competition, but in the end, they end up realizing that they're both very, very much in the race, and they said, well, let's join forces, let's become one company. And they combined the two entities into what became eventually, they combined PayPal. And so Peter Thiel and Elon Musk ended up being co-founders. And in 2.5 years, they were able to sell the company for $1.5 billion to eBay. So that's a story of how, keep your competitors close. And at some point, it might make sense to be more than friends and join forces. If you're speaking about competitors in the marketplace, right? Like you are looking for jobs, like all of your competitors in some ways, right? Because you're going to the same school, similar programs, and you will be looking for jobs roughly at the same time in a very difficult environment with a lot of unemployment. So how do you deal with that? How do you make yourself unique? And that's where the life story comes really handy. First, people want to know who you are before they want to know your skills. They want to know what drives you, what moves the needle for you. If you're a likable person, if you're somebody that I want to hang out with 8-10 hours a day. And so it's really important to be able to tell your life story under 60 seconds in a way that makes you sound and look interesting, right? That could involve mentioning that you're a chess champion in your own country. It could be mentioning, some event where you showed entrepreneurial skills when you're, a kid and you're managing a lemonade stand. It could be, some weird skill that you have where you show that you're able to put in 10,000 hours into something that, is very, very niche. Like maybe you can solve Rubik's cubes under 15 seconds, whatever it is that you have that makes you stand out. You have to be able to tell a story in 60 seconds about you and who you are, what motivates you, and why you are somebody that I want to add to my organization. So that's a very important skill. Second, there is an exercise that I teach in my class, the personal business plan, where you are asked a lot of questions that will help you figure out what are some of the skills, attributes, and strengths, and also weaknesses that you bring to the table to create a combination of those components that make you very different and very unique. And that's something that you have to practice, both in terms of asking yourself your questions, because many of you may not know exactly what your superpowers are. I didn't know my superpowers until my 30s. And so that's something that you have to keep asking yourself and do in a systematic way. And also you have to test it. This is like, think of a comedian coming up with a joke, right? You have to go to small nightclubs and test it with different types of people with different levels of alcohol in their system and see when and what is the cadence and the rhythm and the combination of words exactly that make most people laugh. And that's the same thing about how you tell your story. Sometimes when you emphasize, for example, your technical skills or experience or your diversity and your ability to be intercultural, sometimes you emphasize an experience that makes you very relatable and very human. And a magical combination of all that will eventually become the best formula for you to use for your employers. So, when you do apply for jobs, it's very important to say, to be extremely conscious of how you're presenting the information and keep track of what seems to sell, right? Like this is not employers hate it when you have a standard generic cover letter where obviously you didn't put in the time to research the company, and where you didn't put in the personalization that was required to adapt your pitch to the company's needs. And so you can A/B test, you can try a lot of different versions of it, and then see what sticks. So I'll tell you, for example, simple example of one of the things in my resume that I saw coming up over and over. I played rugby at MIT, and I thought like people would care about the classes I took and the GPA, and I was just like emphasizing that over and over. And I did a few interviews, and every single one of them would like skip all that and go to, hey, so you play rugby, huh? And that was interesting to them because it just raised a surprise in their neural links. They saw me, they didn't imagine a rugby player, and they saw a rugby player on paper, and that generated curiosity. But also, I think for many of them, it was a connotation of maybe, some kind of grit or strength that they didn't associate with me at first sight. And so, I found out by testing this out that rugby was something that I needed to put as part of my story. And it was very effective as a proxy of something that they wanted to see. So you have to know for you what are some of the elements of your stories, the keywords that raise the most eyebrows, where people seem to say, huh, that's interesting, right? Make a note of that, because you will see that there will be patterns in some of those discussions.
Awesome, thank you. So I know we only have about 7 minutes left, and I do want to be respectful of the people that have class at 3. We do have 2 more questions left in the chat. Anna, I don't know if we'll get to yours. We'll try. But if anyone needs to drop off, I completely understand. Please fill out that survey before you go. We definitely appreciate everyone being here today. The first question is from Julie, and she says, how do you find the right people while building a team? And the second question is from Yiting, and she says, can you please share with us the secret to finding customers? So how do you build the right team, and then how do you find customers?
Excellent. So in terms of what type of team should you dream to have around you? Number one, always get people who are smarter than you or more talented than you in some way or fashion. The worst thing you can do is to feel threatened by not being the smartest person in the room, and recruit people who will look up to you because you have something to offer to them. Always work with people that you look up to, because that's the only way that you will create a domino effect of better people joining the team every single time. And 2, you have to do the airplane test. The airplane test is, imagine spending, a flight from San Francisco to Australia, which is about, I think, 16 hours nonstop, in the middle seat next to somebody that you're about to hire. If you think that spending 16 hours stuck on the middle seat with this person sounds like the worst thing you could have in your life, I can promise you a startup, for example, is going to be worse than that in terms of like the intensity of how much you see this person for up to 10 years. And so you have to have good chemistry. You have to want to learn about this person, both at work and personally. And that speaks to some level to value systems. I can't emphasize this enough. If you have really smart people who have no integrity, or they have the opposite value system than you, that's the worst. It's like having really, really evil people who are also very smart. They will screw you over, And so you want to have people that you trust 100%, because they have the same values on like work ethics, on what kind of impact you want to have in the world, in the type of treatment that you want to give to the employees in your company. And so those are the 2 most important things. And then, diversity, complementarity, being able to have a team that adds things that you don't have, and that's always good. People who tell you that you're wrong, the worst thing a leader can do is surround themselves with yes people, because then you will have blind spots that you will miss seeing, and that's one of the main reasons why companies fail. And the second question, let me just go back to that, was
Finding customers.
Finding customers. depends on your company, but you will find customers in people who have the pain point that you're trying to solve. So that's why it's really important to define the problem really well, because if you understand the problem, then you will know exactly who are the customers who will be early adopters of your solution. You can start first with friends and family, but really you have to expand beyond that to really validate your product. And so and it's important to have the first 20 customers who are really excited about your company, like from 1 to 10 they're at 20 in how much they love you, than having 1,000 people who are sort of lukewarm about your solution. So it's not about volume initially, it's more about finding those people who will be excited enough to test your product, will give you feedback, will engage with you, and then they will become really good viral word of mouth supporters and promoters of the company. And that's what Airbnb did. The founders found the top first 100 hosts, and they just visited all of them personally and thanked them for joining their site. They did that. They traveled the whole country to be able to create this very strong loyalty initially, and that was crucial for them to understand what the experience was for the host and how they can improve the site for them, and to create that virality. In fact, if you go to the Airbnb offices, these initial hosts have pictures. There's a wall of fame of all of the first hosts that they had for Airbnb. And so that's a really good lesson for all of us who want to be entrepreneurs to learn.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Anna. I don't think we'll get to your question today, but Professor Hwang, do you mind if I share your email address with everyone? And then that way they can email you if they have further questions?
Of course.
Awesome. And are you teaching any classes in the spring?
Yes, I teach startup investing, which is a class where I teach you the nuts and bolts of how to become a VC investor, like how to start a fund, how to return money, how to raise it, how to find deals and diligence, and make investments from the perspective of an institutional VC. And also, I'll be teaching a class on family businesses, and anybody who's interested in working with or being part of a family business, we'll be talking about how to do this effectively.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And if everyone can turn their camera on for just 1 second, I do want to take a screenshot. If you don't want to turn your camera on, that's fine. But I just want to take a picture so we can post it on our social media. So I will do so. Everyone smile in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Uh-oh, it didn't work. Come back. 1 second.
Oh, good, because I blinked.
Okay, ready? 3, 2, 1. Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much. Have a wonderful Thursday. Have a great weekend. And Professor Hwang, we definitely appreciate it. In about a week and a half, we're going to have Professor Edens, who is one of our innovation professors. So please tune into that one and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you for organizing.
Of course. Thank you guys.
Bye there.
Thank you. Great session.
Thank you. This was great.